Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, comrades, friends, people I don't even like, it's the Center Podcast. I want to talk a little bit about our dear brother Glenn Lowry, John Mcwhorter, two affluent African American intellectuals, authors, I want to say professors, just all around amazing African American human beings. Just all around, just great human beings. I'm not huge fans though. I'm not huge fans. John Mcwhorter and Glenn Lowry make their money primarily in the intellectual space. The upper middle class, black bourgeoisie is where they are. And I'm not knocking that. Usually when I talk about the boule, I talk about them in the pejorative and I talk about them in a negative way. I believe that these two brothers are boule, so to speak, but I don't think that they they genuinely believe in these conservative values because they are so detached. And we'll see that in a minute. We're gonna go over their characterization of what has happened in the Chicago city area with those teenagers that are out. In my opinion, doing what kids do. I would argue that the only reason why it looks like this is because these people are black people. Yes, property might have been damaged, but I don't see any difference. And I mean it, because I'm from New York City, where we've had many of these city kind of outlet things for sporting events or what have you. When there's tons and tons of white folks out doing it, it's not characterized this way. But when it's a bunch of black people, it's characterized this way. So that's them. We'll get to their interview in a moment. But first, we're going to talk about what it is I'm talking about. First, we're going to look at teens in Lakeview who were cutting up, to say the least.
Last night, the city saw its latest teen takeover, this time in Lakeview.
Yeah, a mob of teens filled the streets, climbing onto cars, damaging the vehicles and businesses in the neighborhood. WGN's Kelly Davis has more.
People tell me hundreds of teens poured off the L here at the Belmont Red Line stop. They swarmed the streets and caused chaos throughout the neighborhood. This is the scene that unfolded just after 10 o'clock last night. Hundreds of teens took to the streets, shutting down Belmont for hours.
There was no celebration yesterday. It was just pure chaos.
Roddy Hashish is the manager of the Slice Shop. The restaurant, just steps from the Belmont Red Line stop, was surrounded.
All the things you would typically expect to see in an interview like this or a report like this. A bunch of black kids, a bunch of black people out being rowdy. But notice, this isn't a race riot. I just want to notice this. This is just them out celebrating. Teens out being rowdy. Hundreds of teens take over Lakeview. And they say they were destroying the neighborhood. But this just looks like people in the city when they're out celebrating.
Shared this video he took from inside the store of teens dancing on cars and drinking in the streets.
Right away, we decided to close both the store and the restaurant, and we stayed all night watching, making sure nobody broke in or nobody vandalized our business.
CPD
Nobody
officers
did,
worked
though,
to
did
control
they?
the crowd and move them out of the area, but the teens left behind a path of destruction. People were horrified by the extent of the damage this morning. Shoe prints on cars, hoods dented, windshields broken.
Okay,
It's terrifying. It's terrifying.
Grace Rowan said she even heard gunshots and was too scared to leave her apartment.
It has been very
I'm sure Grace thought she heard gunshots.
chaotic, and as somebody who's lived in Lakeview for
But then again, she is in Chicago. She probably has gunshots all the time.
To see how things have changed over time.
People are hoping the city steps up to prevent this from happening again. Alderman Bennett Lawson helped with cleanup this morning. He released a statement saying, quote, "I will be meeting with the 19th District Police, CTA, and others to discuss what took place and identify ways we can prevent it from occurring moving forward." as well as continue conversations with my colleagues on City Council about how we can keep our youth from participating in these disruptive actions.
We all simply love Lakeview, and to see others coming in and not respecting your community the same way that you do is really upsetting.
Chicago police arrested 2 people, including a 15-year-old girl. She has been...
I'm almost 100% positive those people are from Chicago. I'm almost 100% positive she's from like Arizona or some shit.
Charged with aggravated assault of a first responder, resisting and obstructing traffic. Reporting from Lakeview, I'm Kelly Davis, WGN News.
Okay, we're gonna move on to the next one because we have a couple more to look at. I want to make sure we get to all of them. But as you can see, clearly bias in the reporting in my point of view, but I'll let you guys decide. This is another one. Teenagers out in Chicago.
Karen and Ruby, the interim superintendent, saying last night's group, they crossed a line, they got out of hand, and he added that the youngest suspects arrested were 12 and 13 years old. But speaking of
12 and 13?
of that damage, let's take a look at this right here. Some of the worst of it was captured at the 7-Eleven off Crenshaw. Here in this video, you see the group of police, mainly teenagers, running out with items from the store, some throwing those items up in the air while others run around.
In the air while others run around?
And this video taken from Roosevelt and Canal, capturing the crowd running in multiple directions as officers directed them to leave the area. CPD saying last night officers were dispatched to Roosevelt and Clark in the South Loop around 8 p.m. Officers attempted to disperse a large group through verbal commands, but they said that didn't work. CPD's interim superintendent saying the crowd got so out of hand they had no choice but
they get to be outside
to make arrests.
Our posture has been tolerance, and usually when we say that it's curfew and we ask them to disperse, they do. Yesterday, they, so to speak, crossed the line, began to attempt to loot stores, and they did get into one store. A window was broken. Also, they began to damage vehicles.
CPD says members of the group jumped on vehicles, got into fights, and now some are facing weapons-related charges. In total, 40 people were taken into custody and charged with misdemeanors. Interim Superintendent Fred Waller saying he hopes that these arrests send a message to the suspects and their families. Store owners had to close up shop in the melee, but thankfully no one was injured.
Watch breaking news.
And so they want to send a message to the young teenagers and their families. Yeah, get these little nigga kids in line. Yeah, get your little hooligan children in line. Let's take a look at what happens when a college football team wins a game and people, and I mean tens of thousands of people in the city start to do the same thing.
For the goalpost thrown into the river after the big victory on Saturday, Vol fans tore them down during that massive celebration.
Completely different tone, completely different demeanor, completely different attitudes.
Inside Neyland, one ended up at a fraternity house, another took a swim. 10 News reporter Krissa Lucas introduces us to the people looking to fish it out tonight. Krissa.
Yes, Robin, the last time Vol fans threw the goalpost in the river was in 1998 when they defeated Florida.
Vols defeated Crimson Tide after 16 years, so they tore down the goalposts and paraded them through Knoxville streets.
I don't understand that personally, why you would want to waste a perfectly good goalpost, but I can see how when things get excited, you do crazy things.
Well,
oh, I can see how when folks get excited, you do some crazy things, like dance on a car, or climb up a light pole in Philly, or run in different directions from the police, or throw bags of chips in the air. They ripped the goalpost out of a stadium from the college. They destroyed property and then threw it in the river. And I'm sure they weren't genteel about it.
Fans threw a goalpost in the river, and the last time this happened was 24 years ago. Now UT Stormwater is trying to fish it out.
We just tried to look to see where it went in.
But Ferry says that wasn't obvious at first.
I think it probably floated for a little while, but given that they kind of broke it, I would assume that it took on water and sank.
For now, crews will continue to look for it. He says it's not different than a stick floating on water, but some boat owners may be concerned.
If you find a goalpost on the river, you don't want to leave it in the lake because we might hit it with our propellers or something.
If they find it, Ferry
yeah,
says
man,
it's
with our
usable,
propellers
they will
or
keep
something.
it as a
But
spare
hell,
upright.
they had a great
Or
look at those
if it's
people.
Not, they will just recycle it.
For now, UT Athletics says they already have a replacement goalpost for the next game. They plan to order a new set to put in storage as...
Guys, listen, I'm not trying to grasp at straws here. I'm not. I just when we watch the Glenn Lowry interview, you'll understand where I'm coming from. It's coming from a place of trying to understand why there's so much anti-blackness around. Oh, you can say they were just nicely walking the goalpost up the hill and just tossed it in the river nice and gently. Do you think that that's what happened? Or do you think those college students jumped on cars and danced on them along the way like they do every time something like that happens?
Big game, but overall they behaved pretty well in the grand scheme of things. Obviously fans are upset with the outcome of the big game, but overall they behaved pretty well in the grand scheme of things. There wasn't any major chaos in the streets, just some isolated incidents of unruliness, mainly along Broad Street and near Temple. Action News reporter Catherine Scott joins us live from Center City, which has already been cleaned up overnight. Good morning, Catherine.
Good morning, Tam. Yeah, it's cleaned up and the traffic is moving through here on Broad Street. There were temporary road closures in effect after the game. And you can see they did board up the Capitol Grill here.
Those people had to board up their windows.
On Broad. Philadelphia police officers on Broad Street last night lined up, telling the crowds to move back and clearing the streets around midnight. These were not the citywide victory celebrations fans were hoping for. People still came out, though, some climbing poles and a newsstand. There were not widespread problems, but problems did crop up and some became unruly.
Listen to how she characterizes this event versus children out having fun partying in their city. Oh, it wasn't for no Philly game or no Tennessee college football game. These kids were out for whatever reason they were out. Social media event there's not nearly as many people as there are on these type of events. You have to exert laws and enact policies to make sure that these people and their families get the message that this should never happen again. You Negroes stay over there, coming to our city dancing and having fun. But you really college players and football people out of a football stadium, you guys are fine. I've been to football games, I assure you. There's been times when little children have been punched in the face by grown men. Seriously. Punched in the face in the parking lot by grown men for being a Browns fan.
4:30 p.m., 2 hours before the game even started, this video captured a crowd flipping a car.
That didn't happen with the teenagers.
On the 1700 block of Arlington. By 5:30 p.m., Philadelphia police had already mobilized a citywide emergency response team. After the game, fans did gather, some commiserating, some shimmying up poles regardless of the outcome. But there were still some dicey moments. Someone tossed a section of fencing. Thankfully, it didn't hit anyone. By midnight, officers lined up and they began to disperse the crowds, pushing them back away from City Hall. Some were seen taken into custody. There's no word yet on how
Yo,
many
this is
arrests there
crazy.
were.
None of this
By
happened
1
in the other
a.m., the cleanup
videos
was well underway.
that
The
they
street
claimed
sweepers
these
were
kids
out.
were being
They were
unruly.
clearing up the barricades, and they were resuming operations for normal. And right now here on Broad Street, it has quieted down, and the streets are clear and they are open. We are live.
Man, y'all should have seen what happened when Philly did win the championship game. I think back when Nick Foles won it for him. They actually tore some shit up. I don't understand the mischaracterization and what it's for. I don't understand about when we talk about young black kids just out having fun with no intentions of doing anything other than messing up a 7-Eleven. Don't he have insurance? Grace, stay upstairs. Don't come downstairs. If you don't want to be around black folks having fun, then stay upstairs. But these people, it's their city. They are free people. They are allowed to do it. If these kids can rip a goalpost down from a stadium after a football game and then throw it in the city river, where's the policy for that? Miss me with all that, bro. You sound silly. Now we're going to get into their analysis of what they see happening and see if you can follow how many different places this conversation goes. Like, see if you can keep up. I have great respect for Glenn Lowry and John Mcwhorter. I really do. But it's something to be said about when you are so far detached from your community that when you start to say just silly stuff like this that does have a basis in truth, but it is not necessarily the truth for what we're talking about in the moment. But again, you go ahead and watch this for yourself.
On to the next question, which comes from Harold Baker. Dear Glenn and John, the mayor of Chicago chastised the reporter for calling an event in which black teens looted and vandalized a 7-Eleven a, quote, mob action. This is one of the many instances of black leaders making pathetic excuses for the criminal behavior of black people. So here's my question. When will black voters make these ineffective leaders pay a political price for not keeping them safe and destroying their communities? That's Harold Baker's question. He says, this is one of the many instances of black leaders making pathetic excuses, when I thought he should have said, is this one of the many instances? That should have been a question, in my opinion, Harold, because it is arguable about whether or not he was making pathetic excuses for criminal behavior. He didn't excuse the criminal behavior. He said, don't call the kids undertaking, quote, a mob action, because that's a pejorative that stereotypes them in a certain way.
Which I happen to agree with.
Otherizes, I know that's not a word, John. I know you're a linguist and that's not a word. It otherizes.
No, it's becoming a word.
Yeah, we're going to make it a word. Then that's his position. I disagree with the way in which newly elected Mayor Brandon Johnson reacted to this outrageous behavior by these groups of African-American young people in downtown Chicago. That's not something that you want to have going on in your city. And I thought that a more muscular and, frankly, law enforcement focused response was appropriate. Mayor Johnson says there's no opportunity for these kids in the neighborhoods. In fact, I think I quote him in saying they come from neighborhoods that have been robbed of opportunity. So they're victims of the unfairness of the structures of economic and social life in Chicago. And yet they're...
So let's be clear. The mayor also characterized this wrong. I think he did it in defense of these young people just being out there having a good time, but because he knows it's always looked at as black people rioting over race relations, that he tried to say, well, listen, there's no real opportunities. These kids are out there rioting. You're saying that they're rioting, but that's not what's happening. These kids are out there having a good time. There was no police shooting. Whenever you have these race riots, whenever you have these issues, if you look back through time, it's always because of police shooting. And then when you look at the actual report and the local report from the news, these people are dancing and twerking.
They're ransacking a 7-Eleven. They're turning over cars, setting police cars on fire, assaulting people, and so on. And they are not a healthy thing for the city, not at all, in my opinion. And yes, I think, it's appropriate for law enforcement to react to them in a vigorous way. That would have been my view.
The idea that...
Not in a vigorous way. Say the conservative talking point. I mean, save the niceties. We know what you mean. You're fine with excessive force because you think that this is deserved.
What people like that are doing is a response to contracted job opportunities, is swill. Utter swill. It's street theater, it's performance art, and he ought to be ashamed. He ought to be ashamed of himself. And frankly, I would love...
What does swill mean? Wash or rinse out by large pouring amounts of water only. I swilled out the mug. What? See, this is what I be talking about when I be talking about that bootleg shit. Whatever, John.
Love to see one of those young men taken aside and asked, why did you do that? I'll bet a vanishingly small number of them would say, I ain't got no job.
Right. They're going to say, I just left the Lil Durk concert. That's what they're going to say.
There are no jobs in my neighborhood. There's nowhere for me to go but down. None of them would say that. You'd get rather incoherent answers that what really came down to, basically, this is what me and my guys do. Everybody else is doing it. That's what the generation before me was doing. I guess they wouldn't say that. But it would not be...
Right, because there's no context for that. And he's talking as if him and his guys are out there doing that to the city every week. And we know that that's not true.
We're doing this out of frustration because we can't find a job. That's not what those people say, because that's not what motivates them. And the sad thing is that figuring out what does motivate them and figuring out what to do about it, it's a challenge, because human behavior is not as simple as people like to think when it comes specifically to black people. And I'm angrier than you are, Glenn, about this idea that you can't call it mob action. Because, frankly, this issue with labels is a very easy thing to say, make headlines about, rather than thinking about the real nature of the problems. And it was mob action. I mean, just to see some of the videos of these sorts of things going on.
I really... So then is it safe to characterize what happened in Philly as mob activity? Is it fair to characterize college students after a game swarming the stadium, knocking down the goalpost, running out, jumping on cars, setting things on fire, kicking over trash cans, fighting people? Is that mob action or whatever he called it?
And, there's a sense I have that these things are done almost exclusively by black young men, not even Latino young men, as much as black young men. You do not see a bunch of poor Asian kids doing it. You do not see even lower class white kids doing it. It's a black thing, too.
Oh my God, guys. Oh my God. First, we already saw that that's not true. Two, these are the two type of people that will talk about how people are always bringing up identity politics. That's this group right here. That's these two dudes right here. And the crazy thing about it is we know that that's not true. And black people, when you hear stuff like this, sometimes you think to yourself, oh man, maybe that might be kind of true. Maybe black people, we do get a little bit right. No, I just showed you. Everybody be doing this. What you mean Asian people don't do this? Do I need to show you a soccer match? Do I see white people don't do? Do I need to show you a soccer match? And what just happened in Britain? They just lit. Everybody had like flares in the middle of the stadium, dog, on the field, and they had it in the stands first. And then when they won, they took it down to the field. Could have burnt the whole thing down, killed everybody. In fact, in South America, that happens constantly. Everybody does it, John.
Join up in a gang like that and to tear everything up for no particular reason. We need to get to the bottom of it, and it's not because they can't get a job. That's a very 1968 root causes kind of explanation that makes a certain kind of person feel good to mouth, but it's inhuman because it's basically leaving those people to their own fate rather than thinking about how we could really make life better. They could get a job. It's not what it is. It all sounds like he's been watching Good Times or something. I'm very disappointed in that.
You say, if I go up to one of these kids and I say, "What's up, man? Why are you down there on the streets of North Michigan Avenue tearing up and
neither one of y'all going to do that."
He's not going to say, "Well, I would be at work, but I don't have a job." That's not what he's going to say.
No.
On the other hand, if on the block that he grew up on, or in the apartment complex,
what?
The typical black man, 40 years old, father of two, going out with a lunch bucket at 7 o'clock in the morning, coming back at 5 o'clock at night, earning $60,000 a year. And that was the norm in the community of what guys did.
1951, right.
Yeah, they were lauded. They were looked up to. They were respected. That was So if that kind of structure fades away, you're going to get a kind of pathological, cultural, behavioral matrix in the train of that structure disappearing. So the two things are not unconnected, is what I'm saying. The cultural, behavioral values part and the economic, employment, financial part, maybe not at the level of a given individual. Had he had a job, he wouldn't have been acting like a fool. But at the level of a community, taking into account cross-generational effects.
Okay, I have to stop it. Okay. They are conflating people going out having a good time and yes, doing too much, maybe destroying some property here and there, but however, we know for a fact that in other communities, in other places, and under other circumstances, with other types of people, this is expected. In fact, the city just has it cleaned up. It'll be ready for the next game on Saturday. He's conflating that and all of the economic issues and the real cultural problems that black people have within our community. He's conflating it all together and saying, hey, look at this hodgepodge word salad of black people who don't ever want to act right. And what are we going to do to fix it, John? We just don't never know how to get our shit together. Black people, there's something wrong with us. These kids were out having a good time, probably after a god darn concert or something. And I got these two old ass Negroes squawking about some. Well, if you went up to the block and you asked us, hey, Bucko, what are you doing over there, Bucko? Why are you over there? You don't got a job or something? You need to work hard.
The role models and so on. It's not entirely crazy.
The young man doesn't remember 1951, for one thing.
Correct.
We're not talking about the first generation who watched dad lose his job. That's what I mean by good times. It all sounds like when people first started making these arguments. The guy doesn't know what a lunchbox is. And so really we're dealing with something more insidious. But even let's contract time, because we black people apparently, we don't have real time. We are slaves. Slaves are us, beloved. We're always dealing with memory. Our grandfathers.
That's how you view it.
Fathers were lynched, and so we're being lynched. So let's contract time. Let's say that the lunch boxes were 20 years ago. So Dad lost his job at the tire stamping plant. And since then, he's been kind of having to hustle, and he doesn't really have the money that he used to. And so, you know, it's kind of sad watching Dad like that. And I'm seeing that I'm not going to be able to get a job in a tire stamping factory. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go downtown and start turning over cars. No, it doesn't make any kind of human sense. And what we're trying...
Right, because that's not how it happens, John. Dad, it was sad to watch Dad like that because Dad couldn't, after Dad lost his job, he couldn't get another job. So he hustled. And no, I didn't go down there after watching my dad stay in the house and be sad all day and start turning over cars. I started hustling with my dad. And then me and my dad got locked up. And then we were just fucking gone. This is why Bill Maher holds you up like some gosh darn demigod. Or is it Gog? I think it's demigod. Look at these two smug, just out of touch, just clowns. Samboing, just tap dancing and licking the boot.
Not to think about is, why is it that in communities like that, deviance has been defined so far downward in terms of violence and destruction? Why?
Because we allow our culture to be exploited. Yes, that is our fault.
And it isn't because Dad can't go to work with his lunchbox. That's not, that
Correct.
doesn't make any normal human psychological sense.
And degrading culture and disrespecting our women and tearing down our men. That's why.
Why the violence? Why the casualness about destruction? But the question is why? Where did that start? And that's why I say that we have to talk about culture.
Not white supremacy.
And yes,
right?
Culture. Why did the culture change in such a way that our young man now thinks of it as normal to go downtown and break windows, when frankly,
I just told you,
he's not an especially frustrated person. He may have a job, and the reason he's doing it is not because he feels like employment opportunities are contracted. There's a meme. What created that meme? And I think it was a whole cultural mood where you were trained to think about society owing you something rather than making the best of the worst. And maybe people had to make the best of the worst too much, especially in the old days. Maybe there's something to the hard leftist view permeating communities. But when that means that you're downtown turning over a car, and then you have some person with a PhD lovingly saying that you're doing it because you can't find a job, something's wrong. I don't think people are really feeling for those men.
First of all, the people with the PhD saying that are your friends. They're not down there with us. That's for one. For two, we can have this conversation. We really can. But we're not going to do it in this 10-minute video. And that wasn't the subject. You guys went from all the way over here to all the way over there. You went from talking about what's going to making it an existential crisis and a teachable moment about what can we do to fix these broken Negroes.
But where are the parents in your view of this kind of problem? I mean, kids are out on the street at 1 o'clock in the morning. I mean, you know.
Now it's the father's fault. Watch,
what can they do?
Here it comes.
It's the meme of being a young person in those communities is you're out at 1 in the morning, probably kicking some butt. I don't know if a mother can do much about that.
And where's the father?
Often the father is in jail, or he's not. He has not raised that boy. That's part of it. Yeah.
But you don't really think that.
All right, I'm gonna stop the video right there because the disrespect was intense. I'm not even gonna lie to you, y'all. I'm surprised I even got through all of that. Like I did. DJ Pinhead, I'll see you on the next one.